In what ways does your media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? I have followed conventions through the use of mise-en-scène, such as the location because it is isolated. This creates a mysterious, eerie atmosphere fitting in with the horror genre. I have also considered my use of props. The connotations of the knife and rope include the idea of death and danger. These are all reflective of the horror genre. Also, the title of my opening sequence, Intent, creates enigma codes, which is very typical of the horror genre because this is what the audience want to see from the very beginning. Additionally, with the title, the idea of the colour schemes, the dark colours also are reflective, which also makes the audience, creates the mysterious, eerie atmosphere that the audience want to see in the opening sequence. So the title is reflective in the opening sequence. Also, I've used intertitles. Obviously these are a requirement within an opening sequence. My intertitles are on a black background with a white font. The titles are simple but also effective as they create the idea of uncertainty. I have also followed conventions through the design. The font titles are effective because of the italics used. The idea of the letters flowing also helps the audience understand the narrative because it's the idea of pushing narrative forwards and also the opening sequence as it's flowing. I feel the audience can relate to the titles and also the opening sequence, and both of them has the uncertainty aspect, so putting them together helps the audience further understand the opening sequence and the horror genre. I also feel I have followed the typical chronological order of the intertitles within the opening sequence. The narrative is also conventional, especially the aspect where the girl is hanging from the tree. This is conventional through the use of the horror, conforming to also make a connection with the audience so they are in the right frame of mind when going to watch the opening sequence, making them aware of what to expect. I've also followed the narrative conventions through the use of Todorov's theory. I've conformed to Todorov's theory to guide my horror opening sequence in the right direction. I've included the following stages: equilibrium, disruption, recognition of disruption, attempt to repair disruption, and the resolution. I've used the use of saturation levels to help the audience understand my opening sequence. I've separated the idea of reality and the bizarre through the use of saturation levels in order for the audience to further understand. I've incorporated saturation levels as the narrative progresses, using a theory to suggest this. However, I have subverted the conventions through the use of saturation levels, as this isn't very typical because of the idea of separating the narrative sequence, the idea of the bizarre and the reality. However, I think this is a benefit because it enables the audience to further understand my narrative. I have incorporated the saturation levels to also build tension and the idea of mysteriousness, and for the audience to create enigma codes of, oh, what's going to happen next? Is this reality or is this bizarre? The idea of these enigma codes interact with the audience more, so they gain a further connection with the opening sequence, which makes it more believable. I feel I've introduced my characters well. You obviously had the typical protagonist. She is portrayed as vulnerable. Also you had the typical antagonist, which is portrayed as dominant, mysterious, eerie and dangerous. I feel the idea of conforming to the typical character roles is important, as this is what also creates a horror genre. I also feel keeping the character roles similar is very important, because you don't want to subvert the characters too much, as you want your typical protagonist and antagonist. As the audience, this is what the audience expect to see in an opening sequence, and you don't want to completely change this idea. However, you could subvert the characters slightly, I suppose, but I would say keeping them the same as other films is conventional, as the audience know what to expect and they can also relate to these characters as they've seen them in other horror films. I feel my portrayal of the characters in my opening sequence is one of my stronger areas. This is because you have the vulnerability of the girl and the dangerous aspects. These are completely conflicting characters, and the audience relate to this because they enjoy the idea of the unknown and what's going to happen next. Camera work is emphasised through the use of the quick close-up shots. This helps build tension and suspense in the opening sequence, helps the audience understand the narrative further and helps them get more involved. So the use of the close-up shots helps the audience sympathise with the protagonist.